July 17th meeting of the Harbor Commission. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Brzezinski?
Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Corey Bantolin. Here. Stephen McIntosh.
Here.
Dennis Power. Here. Jim Sloan.
Here.
Helene Webb.
Are there any changes to the agenda, Mr. Reedman?
Madam Chair, just one minor change. It was suggested that we discuss or appoint the Local Coastal Program Committee after Carl gives his report on the Local Coastal Program and the Harbor Master Plan, and that made a lot of sense. So I'd like to move that one item of committee assignments to after that report.
Great, thank you. And now the Harbor Committee matters. Is that you, Mr. Reedman? You or?
Well, I guess the first order of business would be to seat the new commissioner and the reappointed commissioner. Stephen McIntosh is our new commissioner. He's finishing out Commissioner Kelly's term. Currently, Commissioner McIntosh has his own business, KPS Consulting, which provides consulting services to businesses, nonprofits, and local government agencies regarding sustainability issues and corporate social responsibility. Commissioner McIntosh is very engaged in environmental issues. He served on the city's Creeks Advisory Committee in 2012 and 2013 and was actually employed by the city of Santa Barbara as the environmental services supervisor for 10 years, overseeing recycling and related environmental programs with the city of Santa Barbara. He grew up sailing with his family on San Francisco Bay and currently owns a boat that he uses primarily for water skiing. And additionally, Commissioner Bantolin has been reappointed for a 4-year term. This is his second term. His first appointment was in June 2010, and this current appointment runs through December 2017. Corey has also served on various committees, including the Marina Reconstruction Committee and the RFP Selection Committee. So we'd like to officially welcome Commissioner Bantolin back.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think the next step, is that you also?
That would be the election of the chairperson and vice chair, and then we can do some committee assignments, accepting the LCP assignment. So I suppose with that, we could take any nominations for the chair.
I'd like to nominate Bill Spicer, the vice chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, hearing none, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor of Commissioner Spicer taking over the chair position?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Congratulations.
congratulations. How
Anyone?
about,
Should we elect the vice chair?
yes, how about the vice chair next? Any nominations for the vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Sloan.
Okay, Commissioner Sloan. Any other nominations for vice chair?
I'll second that nomination.
Okay. Okay, I don't hear any other nominations for vice chair, so we've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good. I guess we do the Chinese fire drill now.
As chair, I'd like to thank Betsy Kramer for her 3 years of running the, well, she's been on the commission longer, but her 3 years as chair of the commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Letter B, discussion of the parking committee.
Yeah, the committees.
Oh,
We're still on this first one.
okay. Why don't you?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Item 2B, dissolve the ad hoc parking committee since it has not met in over a year and is not a standing committee. C, appoint a committee to provide input on the local coastal program update related to the waterfront. And D, review and update as necessary membership on various Harbor Commission committees.
Scott, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Chair, I would add that there has been some interest expressed in keeping the parking committee and just making it a standing committee, and then we can report back periodically as necessary on parking matters. So if the commission, it's up to the commission whether to dissolve the ad hoc committee or dissolve it and form a parking standing committee.
I have served on the parking committee. I'd be interested if anybody else had thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to keep it going, at least until we get another report as to what the situation is there, rather than reestablishing another committee, and reestablishing it if it's needed. It may not be needed, but we can find that out in a couple of months, maybe. That would be my thoughts for what it's worth.
Okay?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that as well. I think, that maybe keeping it as a standing committee, but do keep the committee intact. And I think as issues come up, have them be able to address it for the commission.
As a member of the committee, I agree. I think it would be good to keep going for a while.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion on that? And we'll.
I move to keep the parking committee as a standing committee.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Abstain, decline. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so moving through the committees, on the attachment in your staff report, the first on the list is the Budget Committee, and that is currently Betsy Kramer, Jim Sloan, and Frank Kelly is now off the commission, so we have a vacancy on the Budget Committee.
I guess first I'd call for any interested volunteers, unless it needs to be a nomination and a vote.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I'd like to stay on.
Very good.
Chair Spicer, I'd be interested in serving
Very
on
good.
the Budget Committee.
I'll nominate Commissioner McIntosh.
I'm sorry, Scott, is this an appointment or do we need a vote? We have a nomination and a second.
I don't think we need to unless we have more than 3 members that want to participate, but we can do it either way.
Very good.
I'll stay on the committee.
Okay. Unless anybody has more to follow.
So I guess it's by acclamation then.
Well, if we get more than 3, then we
Then
would,
we'll need a vote.
then we should probably vote to figure out who.
Very good. The Chartering BAP Committee, the 3 members on there are still active commissioners, unless somebody is looking to join that one or
I think I'd
step
like to
out.
Step down from
Okay.
And I'd be interested in joining that.
Very good. Any other interested parties for that one? Okay. Commissioner Bantolin? The Dredging Committee, which only has 1 remaining member, Commissioner Webb, so there are 2 spots available.
Mr. Chair, I'd be willing to take one of those spots.
Thank you.
I'm also agreeable.
Very good. Any others? All right. Thank you, Commissioner Power. Commissioner Kramer? Commissioner Webb, are you?
And I'll remain.
Thank you. Marina Reconstruction has 3 active members. Is there any changes desired amongst the committee? Okay. It'll stay as is. The I mentioned earlier parking committee. I would be happy to step down if somebody has interest in that, but I'm happy to remain as well. Okay? I think so. RFP selection, again, 3 members that are standing. Does anyone have interest or want to change? Looks like we are intact. Okay, thank you. Looks like we move to the approval of the minutes.
I'll second that.
We have a recommendation and a second. Can I get a vote, please, to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Technically, I am going to abstain. I was not here last month.
And so will I.
Very good. Thank you. We are moving right along.
Okay, for the director's report,
Very good. Thank you, Scott.
since we met last in May, the council adopted a resolution establishing a slip berthing policy for designated commercial fishing slips in the harbor. As the commission may recall, this was changing the method and timing of proving fishermen's earnings so that they can maintain their eligibility for the discounted designated commercial fishing slips. So we looked at that in April, and it went to council in May and was approved, simplifying that process. The council also adopted a resolution establishing the waterfront fee resolution, approving the waterfront fee resolution as part of the budget. And the council also authorized the waterfront director to submit an application to the California Department of Resource Recycling and Recover, otherwise known as CalRecycle, for the Used Oil Payment Program grant, formerly known as the Used Oil Block Grant, in the amount of $25,600. And this is a reimbursement grant that we get for our oil recycling program, for those oil reclamation stations that we have near the fuel dock and in Marina 2 and 4. We get reimbursement for recycling that oil, and also we get reimbursement for the oil absorbent bilge pads that we distribute at the office to boaters. So that's what that has. Moving on, Army Corps of Engineers. On May 14th, Carl Schreiberg and I met with Colonel Kimberly Colleton, who's the commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers L.A. Division, and some members of her staff, some civilian members of her staff. And again, on June 13th, Carl and I met with Brigadier General David Turner, who's the commander of the Corps of Engineers South Pacific Division, which is a huge division, to give him an introduction and orientation to the harbor. He'd never been to Santa Barbara before. So we discussed the problems that happened in the fall when we had the contract issues and missing the dredging cycle, and possible ways of streamlining the contracting process and procedures to avoid a problem like that in the future. And of course, the obligatory boat ride and orientation around the harbor, which was quite well received. And they both expressed their sincere concern about what happened with the harbor closure on March 1st. So we look forward to working with particularly Colonel Colleton as we move forward. And finally, tentative agenda items for the August meeting would be the fiscal 2014 year-end budget review, and probably also another item on the local coastal program. And that concludes the director's report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay. Thank you, Scott. Before we move to the next item, I think I've made a procedural gaffe and did not ask for any public comment on anything that is not on the agenda. So if there's anybody that had any comments that would like to speak now, this is a time. Okay. My error. Thank you. We'll move on to Facilities Management Report. Mr. Triberg.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. I'll have to get used to that here for a while. We just completed the most significant upgrade for the ice house we've had in many, many years. The key component of this retrofit was the evaporative condenser, and this is a part of the ice making system that cools the refrigerant after the refrigerant cools the compressors, and it's a rather complicated system. And you can tell just by looking at these pictures, the old evaporative condenser was looking pretty bad, and it had caused some serious problems last year where we had major outages all of a sudden. We cobbled it together and patched it up for the last year, and finally we were able to implement this rather significant project. The ice making equipment is all stored in the second story of the ice house. The lower story is the bin where all the ice is kept and discharged through a system out to the fishermen that use it. The ice house itself was actually built around the ice making equipment. So to do a project of this nature, you have to remove the roof and the easterly section of the ice house itself, the easterly wall. Using a large crane, we extracted the old evaporative condenser. There it is again. And slowly but surely, with great precision, put the new evaporative condenser in place. It took about a week to work through all those things just to get it installed, which led up to some additional significant upgrades within the ice house itself. And this is just a demonstration as to how tight everything is. It's just a spider web of pipes and tubes and wires, and TRJ Construction, or TRJ Refrigeration, the company that did the work, they shoehorned their way in there and got everything all put together slowly but surely. This is more or less the finished product, and we've been making ice in pretty good shape for quite a while since it was completed. This project was much more than just the evaporative condenser, though. We repaired the water and refrigerant plumbing. There had been chronic leaks for years, which is not a good thing to have, and we finally sealed all of those. We installed an energy-efficient variable frequency drive motor, so we reduced our electrical use in the ice house. There were roof and structural upgrades that you could see in the previous photos. And we had a couple safety improvements. We've installed a refrigerant detector, just like a carbon monoxide detector. We haven't had one before, and if you go in there and there's a big spill, someone could get seriously injured. And also an escape hatch. We do a lot of work in the ice bin itself. Things go wrong all the time, and people go in there. And there really was, it's considered a confined space, so we realized that recently and decided to go ahead and make that upgrade as well. We also repaired the delivery system, which is a whole system in and of itself, and we got about half of it done, not quite all of it, unfortunately. The recent work, the scope of work I just mentioned, was about $100,000 out of $150,000 that we had budgeted in our capital improvement program for this for fiscal year 2014, the previous fiscal year. Earlier in the year, we had some significant work. We replaced the bin compressor, and we replaced the bearings on the ice maker. The ice maker's over 15 years old now, and the ice maker itself is very reliable. It's very sturdy, but the bearings wear out, so that was another significant upgrade. And we've carried over about $20,000, and the final element of this project would be to fix the diagonal discharge auger. It's the one that actually pumps it out into the hoses, into the boats themselves. So the ice house was out of service for about 4 weeks. Fortunately, the TRJ Construction and our staff worked closely to get it done on time, ordered all the parts in advance, and it was about as short a time as possible to complete the significant upgrade. My next project this evening is the Marina One replacement project. As most of the commissioners know, we completed phases 1 through 4 of the Marina One project between 2009 and 2013, and we recently bid out phases 5 through 8, which will complete the project. Phase 5 is fingers J and K, phase 6 H and I, phase 7 E, F, and G, and then finally phase 8 A, B, C, and D, with each phase being done 1 year after the other. A key component of this project is we're looking at extending F finger and adding 8 35-foot slips. It's already been approved, permitted, and everything else, and it's a $191,000 addition to this project. So in a couple of years, when we get a little closer to it, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It does kind of encroach into some of the navigable area in that turning basin right there, but it would be a significant achievement to get that many more slips in the harbor. We had 3 contractors attend the pre-bid meeting and only 1 contractor submit a bid. It was Bellingham Marine Industries, BMI. They had done all the previous work, so it's fundamentally a good thing. They were slightly over budget. I know this is kind of a busy table up here, but if you go to the bottom line, the overall cost of design, construction, inspection, and escalation is about $350,000 more than what we have for the loan from the Department of Boating, which is now the Division of Boating and Waterways. The $7.3 million loan, we've spent about $100,000 on design so far. That's all done. Construction costs, all told, about $7.65 million. We've done a couple things to save a little bit of money. As far as contingencies are concerned, normally you have a change order authority of about 10% for construction contracts. But the previous 4 phases, we weren't spending anywhere near that, and the only change orders were related to dock boxes and power centers. We've included those into the new contract. So we expect little, if any at all, in the way of change orders, so we've reduced that to 5%. We have a similar escalation clause in here to the tune of about $400,000. And that is a line item that will address increases or decreases in the cost of construction and labor. It's an index that's in what a magazine called Engineering News and Review. It's kind of an industry standard. We had a $350,000 escalation clause for phases 1 through 4, and I think we spent $50,000 or $60,000. It helps the contractor to sharpen their pencil when they submit a bid, especially when they're bidding phases that are 3, 4, 5 years out, because they know that they'll get a fair price based on that index. So that worked well in the past, and if the economy stays relatively flat, we probably won't use much of that money. The remaining cost, about $354,000, will come out of the Harbor Preservation Fund, our capital fund. There's adequate funds in there to do that. So we'll be taking this to council next Tuesday to award the contract, and hopefully construction will begin around November for Phase 5. And that concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good, thank you. Any questions? Commissioner
Chair, I
McIntosh.
have a quick question for staff. BMI was the lone bidder this time. Were they the lone bidder for phases 2 through 4 as well? And are there many firms out there that do this sort of work, or is it just so specialized we don't see others submitting bids for a $7 million project?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner McIntosh, the first phase, they were not the low bidder. They were underbid, but they were a subcontractor to the low bidder. On phases 2 through 4, there were, I think, 2 other bids, and they were the low bid on that. They do sometimes lose work, not very often. It is very specialized. When we started working on this project, there were probably 3 or 4 dock manufacturers and construction companies. Those no longer exist, so they're one of the only that can do this kind of work. But they're very good, and it's nice to have the same docking system, maintaining that consistency.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Webb?
Excuse me, in terms of the ice house, do the fishermen pay for the ice?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Webb, yes, they do. It's $80 a ton.
And I'm glad you fixed the leak. How much water is used to create this ice? Is it a massive amount, or?
No, to make a ton of ice, you use a ton of water. So without the leaks, it's relatively efficient, and the amount of water you use is commensurate or consistent with the amount of ice that's sold. I don't know how much ice we sell every year. I think we average probably 3 to 5 tons a day. The capacity is 12 tons a day, and the bin holds, capacity is 10 tons a day, and the bin holds 12 tons. So fixing the leaks was important, especially the leak of the refrigerant. That is a serious problem, so we're glad we finally got that taken care of.
Thank you. It was a massive project. Yeah.
Any other comments? Thank you. I greatly appreciate the photographs and the graphics you use. I always like those projects. Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Cronman in the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, the Division of Boating and Waterways has recently released its 2013 summary of boating fatalities, and it's always kind of interesting to review, sort of sad to review, but interesting. And I guess in a good news, bad news story here, the good news is that only 38 people died in boating accidents in California last year, and compared to a previous low of 40, so it's a historic low for the state. Many people, harbor master colleagues I've talked to up and down the state, believe that it reflects a couple of things. It reflects considerable outreach on the part of the state regarding encouraging people to wear life jackets. That's simply that. It's that simple. But moreover, they believe that it may, to a degree, a significant degree, be a function of people doing less boating on lakes because the lakes are so down during the drought. So, either way, it's an appropriate time to remind folks of some of the boating safety tips going into the summer. But before I do, just a couple breaking down the numbers. Of those 38 fatalities, 26 were drownings, and 21 of those 26 didn't have life jackets. So it's conceivable to say, it's plausible anyway, that close to 21 of those 38 people might be alive today were it not for the fact they weren't wearing life jackets. Because in vessel accidents, typically, not always, but typically people aren't killed by the accident. People are often spilled into the water, and if they are unable to swim, and if they're not wearing life jackets, then that's how the fatalities occur. So this drum will never stop beating. I'll never stop beating it from my position here, and I think it's one to keep beating. And so we also wanted to take the time to just offer some, as we're headed to high summer here, offer some boating safety tips. And Brian Slagle was kind enough to put this into a PowerPoint slide for me because these can't be overemphasized. Take a boating safety class. For folks who head out to sea, you know, it's not always placid. It's not always Pacific, as it's named. It's wild and crazy. It can get foggy and rough, and all kinds of things can happen. And the Sail and Power Squadron offers a great set of boating safety classes. They're right here in the harbor locally. And taking a boating safety class can be of life-saving value, actually. Make sure you equip your vessel with all the appropriate equipment it's supposed to have. And the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Auxiliary can help you with this. There's a long laundry list, everything from sound-making devices to personal flotation devices, life jackets, to lights and all kinds of things. And make sure when you go to sea that you are completely equipped for any emergency that might befall you, okay? That includes having radios tuned up, batteries charged, because once you break the jaws of the harbor, it's a whole different world out there. And again, I apologize, but this is a drum we're just going to keep beating. Alcohol and boating don't mix. I know it's not illegal to drink and drive on the ocean, but it's not smart. Okay, and I'd like to respectfully remind our boating community that boating under the influence, the blood alcohol content is exactly the same as it is on the street. And one lucky gentleman who we stopped for boating under the influence the night of 4th of July is lucky he didn't go to jail because we got called on another a fist fight in the marina. So it's .08, okay, and .08 is .08, and Harbor Patrol is on the lookout for boating under the influence. You see signs go up at Memorial Day, you see signs go up at Labor Day, you see signs at 4th of July, but the message should be year-round, that drinking and driving a boat just don't mix. And if you have a commercial license, whether it's for fishing or towing or a workboat license and what have you, it's .04. So folks should be very, very careful about the consumption of alcohol in the ocean because really alcohol and boating don't mix. It's one thing to have it at your barbecue when you're on the anchor and what have you and you're having a beer at dinner, but drinking and driving boats don't mix. Safe speeds, especially in the harbor, but in general. You get outside, onto the open ocean, it seems like, any speed is a good speed. We all saw the Darth Vader vessel in here the other day. It goes 60 knots. Well, he may be able to go 60 knots, but the question is, should he? And where is it safe to go 60 knots, right? So, and we all know the speed limits and the no-wake limits in the harbor. That's really important for boaters to observe those because that's where problems happen because it's hard to slow down once you start rolling into the harbor at a high speed without causing some havoc. Maintain a proper lookout. I remember commercial fishermen back in the day when I was fishing who would set the autopilot and go to sleep across the freighter lanes. Well, times have changed, and there's been a few fishermen who crossed the bar because of that. You need to keep a proper lookout. Autopilots are a wonderful thing, but I've actually seen operators rip the autopilots out of their boats and throw them in the trash because people fell asleep at the wheel. It's important to always have a proper look at, no matter all the advent of all the wonderful electronics that we have. We'll put the boat in gear, take you where you want it to take you. An alarm will go off if there's something in the radar ring. An alarm will go off when you're on your waypoint. Always, there's no substitute for a human watch. Always keep a proper lookout. Monitor the weather and the sea conditions. People come to us and say, what's the weather going to be like today on the ocean? And for a lot of reasons, some of them being reasons of liability, I will admit, we point them to the NOAA weather radio broadcast, right? We print it out, we put it on the counter in the foyer. It's always available for people to ask if they want to know what the update is or what the forecast is or something beyond that. We're certainly willing to help. That's what we're there for. But folks should always know the weather conditions and the weather forecast for the several days ahead, at least 72 hours before they leave the dock. It's absolutely indispensable knowledge to have. It might be flat, glassy, calm from here to Gaviota. And if you're headed to San Francisco, as soon as you turn Point Conception, and those of us who've gone around Point Conception all know this, that it can be, 15-foot seas and 60 knots of wind. So Local knowledge is critical, and always knowing the weather and the weather forecast is extremely important. File a float plan. It can be as simple as emailing your spouse or your loved ones or your, anybody and saying, look, I'm headed to Santa Cruz Island. I'm going to I'm going to Scorpion, then I'm going to Prisoners, and I expect to be back in 3 days. If you don't hear from me by X amount of time, contact the harbor master's office, see if my boat's in the slip, and if it's not, call the Coast Guard. Okay, so it's very simple. A lot of people who could be alive today aren't because they simply didn't file a float plan, as well as observe some of these other boating safety tips. And finally, review the boating ABCs. The boating ABCs is this little booklet. We have them in the foyer of our office. It's the ABCs of boating law, and it tells you everything you want to know to be safe and be well equipped on the ocean. Now, you might ask me here tonight, well, Mick, what are all the laws regarding life jackets? And I could tell you a few of them, but I would be speculating on all of them because I can't remember them all because they are somewhat complex. They vary depending on the boat, the size of the boat. Is it sail? Is it power? Are there kids on board? How old are the kids? Et cetera, et cetera. So I'd highly recommend everybody who goes boating out of Santa Barbara Harbor should acquire one of these. We have some in the office. We can get more from Cal Fish and Game up on Cliff Drive, and we can certainly get more from the Department of Boating and Waterways. So that's the summary of the boating tips, and I hope everybody has a safe and enjoyable boating summer, and we really, really count on people paying attention to these boating safety tips. So the latest event we had was the Harbor Nautical Swap Meet. It's been a while. We haven't seen you in a couple of months, but it was a terrific success, one we were very happy and proud of. There were actually 58 vendor stalls occupied with a total of, I believe it was almost 50 vendors. It was packed. The same fare as typical. Kayaks, fishing gear, boat parts, rigging, and what have you. And one of the more interesting participants, as you see in your staff report, was Skip Abed, the owner of the Santa Barbara Sailing Center, who unloaded his storage shed that's on his dock down at his facility. And he sold, I think he had 4 different spaces, and he sold literally tons of gear. In fact, he sold so much gear that his float came up 8 inches. He gained 8 inches of freeboard on his float just by unloading and participating in the swap meet. So we want to offer a special thanks to Skip for keeping his float floating. And beyond that, we want to offer a special thanks to the Harbor Merchants Association. This was a benefit for them, and they're the ones who in turn provided the bagels and donuts and coffee from the Santa Barbara Roasting Company and fruit from the Berryman. So another successful year for the Harbor and Nautical Swap Meet. And finally, the 4th of July recap. As the title indicates here, Fog, Fireworks, and Fizzle, we had a little bit of everything. The day started with thousands of people enjoying a sunny, beautiful day at the waterfront. It was great to see West Beach packed from one end to the other, except, of course, in the clear area around the fireworks. But then around 6 o'clock, I could feel, as we were having our briefing in the conference room, I could feel the moisture in the west breeze, and I looked out, and sure enough, the fog and low clouds was starting to roll in. And right on schedule, it hit the harbor about 8 and started to settle in by 9. And what ended up being a rather gauzy fireworks show, it was sort of like looking at the fireworks through cataracts at times. This is a typical shot of the fireworks going off, but it was still a lovely show. And people, nobody, I didn't hear anybody complaining about Mother Nature, because I think we all know there's nothing much you can do about that. But then what did happen is about 15 minutes into a 22-minute show or what have you, it stopped. It stopped completely, and everybody was like, okay, is this the finale? Is it over? Is it not? And what had happened is a low fireworks shell had a burnt ember hit one of the control wires for the computer panel and burned through it. And so it took the fireworks folks down on West Beach about 10 minutes to fix that problem. But in the meantime, people had re-entered the clear zone in the harbor entrance thinking that was the show and it had ended. So it took us another 10 minutes to clear them out and communicate with the fire prevention folks and the fireworks people to restart the show. And then the show was operated manually after that, not by computer. And so admittedly, it was a little sporadic. It looked like you had a finale, and then it wasn't quite a finale, and this, that, and the other. So But you know what? I'll be honest with you. In the end, I didn't hear anybody complaining about the fireworks show, which is indicative of the good spirit in which people, came down to the waterfront to enjoy this. But that being said, we're in the process of issuing a request for proposals moving into the future for our fireworks vendors. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Croman. Are there questions from the commission?
One question. I'm just
Commissioner
curious why
McIntosh.
Sparkle wasn't participating this year.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, Sparkle, and this is what I'm told, and I don't believe I'm speculating, owing to ongoing challenges for many nonprofits, financial challenges, that Sparkle was unable to participate this year. Moving forward, however, and I'm glad you brought it up, Commissioner, moving forward, however, a lot of folks have expressed interest, at least in reinstating the music sync-up part of the show, and we will be looking into that, with a great deal of attention moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, I've got a question, no comment, Mick. Thanks very much for that extensive and intensive report on boating safety. And I wonder if you at the waterfront do any work with the county parks, rangers and so forth. I mean, given the recent drowning at Lake Kachuma, I would think that some of the educational materials that you have could be very useful over there.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, we don't work that closely with county parks, but I can only assume the information we've advanced tonight that they're advancing to their constituents as well. We just don't cross paths or jurisdictions that much. Occasionally we do, but not that often.
Well,
If you'd like me to contact the county regarding this and send them this report, I'd be more
I
than
would
happy
think it
to
would
do
be
so.
really, I mean,
I will do that.
You've put in so much work into this. I would think it would be really helpful to work together at
Sure.
least on this part.
I have contacts at county parks. I'll send this to Monday. I'll be out of the office tomorrow.
Thanks very much.
All right.
Very good. Any others? Commissioner Bantelin and then Commissioner Sloan.
Thanks, Mick, for the report. Had a quick question on the fireworks. So we're going out to RFP, which is definitely fine. The Parade of Lights. I know last time the new company did the Parade of Lights first. Are we going RFP there? When is the selection happening? How does that affect that? I'm just sort of curious.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bantelin, we're under contract with Bay Fireworks, the existing company, for Parade of Lights for this year. So the RFP will be for the 2015 July 4th show and Parade of Lights show. They haven't failed us on the Parade of Lights show yet. It's a pretty small show. They're promising to make up what happened at this 4th of July at Parade of Lights, so hopefully we'll have a pretty spectacular show. But given that we missed part of our finale last year, and the 20-minute problem this year, we really think we need to go out and look at what other options are available.
Sounds good. Thanks for that.
Good. Commissioner Sloan.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin, for the boating safety tips. One suggestion I might have is to put this in the dock lines, an article about this in the dock lines, because I think this is good information. I mean, those of us that have been boating for a number of years recognize everything that you say there is the truth and something that we need to be diligent about. So even people that are comfortable at sea and things like that need to be reminded of this occasionally. So I think it's very good.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, thank you. If I'm not mistaken, we just did that. Can somebody correct me? I think this last dock lines may have had, if it didn't, I assure you it will.
I apologize.
No,
I haven't seen that.
please don't, because it may have been our bad, and if it's not, I will make sure it gets in there, but I thought it was in the last issue, but if it wasn't, we'll correct that.
Very well could have been.
Okay.
And I missed it.
Commissioner Webb.
Mick, thanks for the report on, and especially the safety. A few years ago, we created a kayak guide for the people who rent the kayaks. And now with the stand-up paddle boards, I've noticed people are swimming in the middle of the channel off their boards and kayaks. And are they still instructing the renters?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Webb, yes, they are. It's interesting with paddle boards. They're a boat when you're standing up, and they're subject to all the regulations and restrictions and privileges, if you will, of boating. When they lie down, they're a paddle boarder, and paddle boarding across the harbor and swimming across the harbor are municipal code violations. And we're doing everything we can to inform people of these rules and regulations. The challenge for us, and this is by no means an excuse for lack of attention and enforcement, is the exponential increase in interest in human-powered ocean recreation, especially paddleboards, stand-up paddleboards. So, yes, you're absolutely correct. It's not safe and it's not legal, and we, especially on swimmers and paddleboarders who are lying on the paddleboard, that's not allowed by municipal code in Santa Barbara, primarily because you can't see them. That's the whole point. You know, if you're in a boat up here, it's hard to see them down there. It's dangerous. So we do everything we can to educate and contact those people when we see it or when it's reported to us.
Yeah, I think specifically, too, and they're just right in the middle of the channel, that they need to be really instructed and do the safety things.
It's my understanding, and I'll double check, Commissioner Webb, it's my understanding that, in fact, I know some of the vendors even show videos to their renters before they go out. I know, I don't want to name names, but I know some of them are very vigilant on this. They've all got the message, but it doesn't mean we can't send them the message again. So I'll double check on that and see if we need to distribute more brochures, contact them again, and advance your concerns. Sure.
I could add to that, Commissioner Webb. On the Memorial Day weekend, we had an enormous amount of contacts. It was the great weather, and we had a huge, for whatever reason, I guess the holiday weekend, a lot of contacts with stand-up paddleboarders without PFDs and so forth. So we went around. A prominent harbor worker out in Marina One cornered me and said, you know, we need to do something about this. So we sent Pat Henry from our office around to all the places that rent the SUPs and made sure that they were instructing their folks. Skip Abed at the Sailing Center has a good instructional videos for his kayaks, SUPs, the little power boats that he rents. And Paddle Sports is very proactive on educating their people on where to go and where not to go. And then we went and reread the logs, and virtually all of those contacts were not rental people. They were people that came in and launched out of the launch ramp or wherever. So we kind of got after our rental folks. So they were educated, re-educated anyway, but people that just come on down, and we don't have quite as much control over that. So we're very aware of it.
Yeah, and that's been my experience as well in watching them go down the fairway. They're usually the people that don't have PFDs are on their own stand-up boards and things like that. So I think that's part of it, and I don't know how to educate those. Put a sign at the launch ramp or something? I don't know.
Perhaps a topic for another
Yeah.
meeting, yes. Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, Commissioner Power.
You mentioned education. What is it that they're telling the paddleboarders, the vendors? What are they telling them? To stay out of the channel or to just watch out for boats? I mean, what kind of information are they being given?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, my understanding is they tell them to stay out of the center of the fairway, or if you're crossing the fairway, to cross it at right angles rather than dilly-dally around in crossing the fairway. And then I know Skip in particular instructs them on not to go out beyond a certain distance beyond the ocean buoy and to paddle upwind so that when you're coming back to the harbor, you're returning downwind. That's more of a safety issue rather than an inner harbor navigational problem. But they do instruct them on how to enter and exit the harbor by going around the edges of the marinas versus going right down the main fairway. Those are the types of things that Paddle Sports and the Sailing Center do.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Power, in addition, they have brochures that we worked with the tenants on several years ago that we've slightly amended that actually show a designated and preferred and intelligent route for those folks. But I'm gonna take to heart what Commissioner Sloan said. I'm going to do some thinking and work with my colleagues to see if there's some way to reach out, because I think we know most of the businesses that are involved. I hope we know most of the businesses that are involved in renting SUPs and kayaks that come into the harbor. Maybe there's a way to get those materials to them and work with them. But let's see what we can do.
And the businesses that sell them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much.
All right, anything Mick, I had one. Thank you for your, and no pun intended, sobering report on the boating deaths. I was just curious, of those 38, did it identify how many were alcohol-related?
Mr. Chair, it may have. It's available. It typically wouldn't, I wouldn't think, but if you drill down in that report, there are a lot of granular details in it about the boating fatalities, the boating accidents, the kind, the place, freshwater, saltwater, and what have you. I didn't get that deep into it to find that answer, but certainly on the Division of Boating Waterways website, you can just click on their 2013 vessel accident report summary and find it there. I'd be surprised if they had that statistic. Certainly folks could look there.
Very good.
Yeah,
Sure.
and the educational material that was on the at each marina before 4th of July, they did talk about how many alcohol-related fatalities in boating there were every year. So, and I don't remember if that was a national statistic or a state statistic, so it may be available.
They don't go together, that's for sure, alcohol and boating.
You've noted that. I appreciate it. Okay, moving on to new business. 5-year review of uses in the harbor commercial zoning. Jeanette, would you read the recommendation, please?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission review the extent of nature of the uses in the harbor and shoreline area of the harbor commercial zone per Municipal Code Section 28.70.030, and B, recommend to the Planning Commission that the present mix of uses will ensure that the harbor remains a working harbor.
Very good. And is that Mr. Bossy?
Yes, it is. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm here to present to you the 5-year review of the Harbor Commercial Zone. This is a good exercise for us to go through. It kind of helps us look back at what has taken place over the last 5 years, allow us to address our any weaknesses we may have, or possibly build on the strengths that we already have as far as a working harbor. It's been especially good for me, having only been here 2 years. I've been able to go back and research, like it says, 5 years, and so that's been really helpful for my learning curve as well. So jumping right in, our outline for the presentation, we'll quickly go over the municipal code, our harbor master plan policies, look into commercial fishing, our slip uses and permitted mooring area, go over some beach permit items as well as business activity permits, cruise ships, and then anything at the end, our upcoming use issues, which actually Carl's going to elaborate on a little further in the upcoming report. So as far as the municipal code is concerned, Jeanette cited that particular chapter 28, which is also known as our zoning ordinance. And every 5 years, the Harbor Commission, you folks are tasked with the review the extent and nature of our existing uses in the harbor commercial zone and make any recommendations you deem fit to the Planning Commission. And upon your hopeful approval this evening, I will then move this process to the Planning Commission in late August or early September. And finally, when all that's done, we send a copy of the report to the California Coastal Commission for their files. So our harbor master plan. The master plan was prepared in 1996, and it identifies and defines ocean-dependent uses as the primary use for our harbor, and then it identifies ocean-related as well as visitors serving as secondary uses to the harbor. The whole idea with that is to ensure that the Santa Barbara Harbor remains a working harbor, and I figure we've done pretty well to that extent so far. One thing that you'll notice throughout this, we're required to talk about lease changes, openings, and things like that. But over the last 5 years, and even prior to that, there's really not a lot of activity as far as lease changes or changes in use. The reason being, everybody's doing quite well, and I think that's that's obviously a good sign for the harbor. But that's all based on sound decisions that are made by your commission and then staff following up and implementing those decisions and policies. So first up are our ocean-dependent uses. These are anything from boat mooring and marine-related government facilities to boat repair facilities, things that are dependent upon the ocean. You'll see the interior space that's been occupied as well as our exterior space. This is our largest square footage. It occupies the most square footage is our ocean-dependent uses. One of the big things that has happened as far as change is concerned was the dry dock that was formerly at the end of Marina One F Finger moved away, and in its place, as of September of 2012, your commission approved a lease with Clean Seas for a number of years at our Marina One F Finger at the very end tie there. And Clean Seas is an oil spill response vessel that not only patrols and practices around the Santa Barbara area, but also from Ventura all the way up through San Luis Obispo. So it's nice to have them in more of a permanent capacity here in our harbor. As far as lease changes, well, it's not actually a lease change. One thing that we're very happy about, and I know the fish market is as well, these are the folks at the end of our 117 building. The Santa Barbara Fish Market will be moving their warehousing and processing facilities to a new site. So they continue to grow rapidly and have outgrown their space, and so they've identified a space over on North Quarantina. It's about 8,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet of exterior space, the lot for their trucks and things, and then 3,000 feet of interior space, and they're looking to move out by October 31st of this year. So, and their future plan is to turn that more into a real market and spruce it up, really clean it up, and make it more of a hospitable place to come in there and buy your fish. They have great products, so they're going to clean it up, and that's just something they want to do. And we're very happy with that. Next are our ocean-related uses. We have 14 ocean-related uses, and these vary everything from the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum to our marine equipment shops. One of the changes that has occurred over the past 5 years, there was an RFP for about 734 square feet of office space back in late 2011. It was formerly occupied by the Chandlery. And through that RFP process, the Santa Barbara Fish Market was awarded a 5-year lease agreement, and they moved their office space, which was actually upstairs in the fish market in kind of a loft area, over to right behind us at the 132 building. The photo we have here is Paddle Sports, who also continues to do a great deal of business and continues to improve on their facility, recently getting a new front window there and a nice open functioning window as opposed to the older windows. So they continue to do great work with their space. Our visitor serving uses, these are all the uses, the restaurants, the retail, that's where all this kind of fills in. Currently we have 13 visitor serving uses, and again, these 3 uses are for the harbor proper. I'll get to Stearns Wharf in a minute. Occupying about 20,000 square feet of space, of interior space, and about 4,000 exterior space. One significant change is pictured here. Back in, I believe it was 2011, Council, first the Harbor Commission and then Council approved the assignment of the old Minnow Cafe lease to Brophy Brothers. They operated in that same small space for about 6 months and then shut down for 6 months while they remodeled, only to open in May of 2012 as On the Alley. I'm sure all of you have been there. It does an extremely brisk business, and in the fall of 2012, a few months later, we combined those leases for On the Alley and Brophy's. It's just easier for everybody, and they continue to do great work out there and serve wonderful, wonderful products. Next is our Stearns Wharf, our 2,300 square foot wooden wharf, and we've got 17 businesses out there. These are all focused on more of your visitor serving and commercial uses. We have a number of restaurants, obviously, and ice cream, candy, and everything in between. The one change that has happened out there was an RFP went out in the fall of 2010 and was awarded through a competitive process and was awarded to Conway Vineyards Incorporated, which is also on our agenda later tonight. And they have done an amazing job at renovating that facility. They do a brisk business as well, and I got to tell you, there's probably no other place, no other better place to taste wine than out on Wharf and the view those folks have. So that's our Stearns Wharf uses. Moving into our commercial fisheries, this is, I think, the most important part of our working harbor. This is definitely the pinnacle of our working harbor, our fisheries. Our most valuable catches, as reported back in February, Mick did a very comprehensive review of the commercial fisheries industry in our harbor. Most valuable catches continue to be sea urchin, lobster, rock crab, halibut, sea cucumbers, and sablefish, which are otherwise known as black cod, I believe. Is that correct, Mick? He teaches me every day. The value of our fisheries continues to be amazing. In calendar year 2012, 6.6 million pounds of fish and fish products were hauled in with a net worth of about $10.3 million. Last year, 2013, 6.1 million pounds worth about $10.2 million. And as Mick explained in his report in February, you then have that multiplier effect when it goes out to the restaurants and things like that. So it's an amazing industry that continues to thrive in the Santa Barbara Harbor. Next are our slip uses. We have 1,139 slips in 4 different marinas within our harbor. 997 of those are for recreational use. Currently used as recreational use, I should say. And 84 of those are used as liveaboards. We do have additional space for more liveaboards, so if anybody's curious, they can come down to the harbor office and look into that. I believe it's about $140 per month. And, of course, there are a number of requirements to make that happen. We have 82 commercial fishing slips available in the harbor, as well as 60 miscellaneous slips. And those are for things like visitor berthing. When people ask me what that is, basically people are coming up for the weekend and they want a space to put their boat. They can come. It's kind of like a harbor hotel for boats, if you will. Yacht brokerage slips, as well as slips for federal and local government vessels as well. Our permitted mooring area, this is the area off to the east of Stearns Wharf. The goal here with that particular mooring area is to reduce the number, is twofold. Reduce the number of vessel groundings on East Beach in storm activity or high winds, and also provide the opportunity for individuals seeking mooring space in city waters. You don't find mooring areas in cities or counties anymore. They're very few and far between, and we are one of the few that have mooring areas for folks. It was implemented in 2006, and currently we have 23 of 46 mooring sites occupied, so right at 50%. So if anybody's interested, again, come up to our office. They are, I believe, $250 per year for one of those mooring sites. Next are our beach permits out on West Beach. We have a maximum of 50, actually it could be more than 50 owners, but it's 50 spaces for outrigger canoes, small sailboats, and rowing dories. They cost $250 per year. We also have 8 outrigger rack permits. Those run out for about $800 a year. These are chomped up very quickly, so if you're interested, please call us and we'll give you the information on when they're available. They do open up. It's on a first-come, first-served basis on the second Friday of every March, and they are, as I said, taken up very quickly. And it's a very busy place. On the other side, over by Ledbetter, we have our Cat Beach permits, and there's a maximum of 65 vessels allowed on Ledbetter Beach at the cost of $200 per. They're available. Cat Beach is open April through October 31st. Then hopefully everybody takes their catamarans off West Beach. We get ready for storm activity and things like that. Currently, we have 43 of the 65 subscribed. So again, there are some openings, about 22 of those. So come on up if you know anybody. This is like a sales pitch, but if anybody has a catamaran sitting in their driveway that they'd rather put, or you'd rather put out on the beach, have them come up to our office. We'd be happy to help them out. An important part of our activities down at the harbor is our business activity permits, and I provide a presentation to the Harbor Commission every October, giving you an update on that. We began monitoring business activity in the harbor back in 1972, and what the business activity permits do are establishes rules and guidelines for folks wanting to conduct marine-related services in our harbor. It provides the opportunity for those folks to promote and offer marine-related services in a safe, orderly, and professional manner. We make sure that they have the appropriate business license. We also make sure that they have the appropriate insurance coverage. And currently we have 67 business activity permits, and it fluctuates generally around 65 to 70. I believe the high over the past 3 years has been about 77. But what we try and do, this is, instead of just anybody coming out on your boat and working, please use the business activity permit list. It's on our website. You can go through and you know at least that these people have a business license and the required insurance. They also get a name tag that they're supposed to carry on their person when they're out and about. So this is an important service that we hope helps everybody in the harbor. One of the newer uses, I guess, in theory, is the cruise ship activity that has been coming to Santa Barbara since 2002. I also give a couple of reports on this a year. It's split into 2 seasons, the fall season and the spring season. Again, these are cruise ships only come in the shoulder months, so those months that aren't very busy in the big picture. So you're looking at your March, April, and early May. You're also looking at October, late September, October, and into November. This is a little history of the last few calendar years. Fiscal year, it's right there. 2011, we had 4 visits. Went up the next year to 11, 13. In fiscal year 2014, which closed, at least on the cruise ship side, on May 4th, we had 28 visits. It was by far our most ever. And so far in planning for fiscal year 2015, we have about 25 visits, equally separated, about 12 in the fall and about 13 in the spring. And again, I say it every time, it's an industry where they can call the night before and say, we're not coming. There's a whole lot of coordination that goes into making sure these folks get on and off and are safe. We work with our Chamber of Commerce, Visit Santa Barbara, the downtown organization, a whole host of others to make sure that people get on and off safely, as well as our Harbor Patrol does a great deal of work with them as well. So that's been one of our newer uses in the bigger picture. Obviously, it was here in the last time we did the 5-year report, but I thought it was worthy of mention because it is an important revenue source, not only for the harbor and the waterfront department, but also for our downtown businesses and other waterfront businesses. And one last other use, and Carl's going to be talking about it a little bit. Well, actually, he's been talking about it the last time we met as well as tonight, is our local coastal program update. That's one of the things just that's out there that we're monitoring and Carl's participating in as far as future uses and things of that nature. So in summary, when we take all that, put that all together, the department's lease and slip management policies help to preserve the working harbor, and we think that's in direct, it works directly with our zoning ordinance as well as our municipal code. And we feel that the current mix of uses appropriately ensures the Santa Barbara Harbor remains a working harbor for many, many years to come. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions and anything else you have.
Quite extensive. Thank you. Any questions from the Commission?
Yes.
Commissioner Powell.
Good report. Thank you very much. A couple of questions on slip uses. I understand from the written report that there are 44 unoccupied slips. Is that correct?
Yes. And where am I? Continue with your question. I'll wrap it all up in one.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, there are 44 unoccupied slips. Those are generally those slips that we use a lot for. That's over the year as an average, and those are the slips we use for the visitors coming in, or government agencies that need a slip, your ICE, those kind of folks coming in and out. So that's how those slips are filled. It seems a little odd that there aren't just 44 slips at any one given time sitting there. That's kind of an average over the year.
Yeah. So my question is, those are not slips held by permittees and you're getting rent on them. You use them for a variety of purposes.
That's correct.
Okay. Would you have an idea of approximately how many slips are unoccupied where boats aren't in them, but where permits are held and rent is being paid, or are there really none?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, that's a great question. I just know over the past number of months, we're filling up every weekend. So when you get out there, every slip is taken up, whether primarily by visiting vessels. We have a lot of races coming in.
Yeah.
We're a very active harbor. As everybody knows, the FAR 40 is there from Wednesday to Sunday. So those people come up 3, 4, 5 days in advance. So we really are filling up a lot.
So this number is a good cushion for you to keep for a variety of temporary uses.
That's exactly correct. And again, it helps those folks coming in up to the harbor because we don't take reservations unless it's for really, really big boats. And so this allows them to have a place to stay. And again, lately we've been filling up, no
Great.
problem.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Chair, if I might, and Commissioner Power, just to add a couple notes to what Brian said. 30 of those slips of the 44 are designated by the municipal code as city inventory. So those are city slips that are used specifically for the purpose of renting to visitors. And we also have a temporary cancellation policy. It's in our rate and fee schedule where if you're going to go away for more than 90 days, you have the privilege of paying only 25% of your slip fees, and that's, of course, a win-win. You get a 75% reduction, the slip permittee does, and the city, it functionally becomes another part of the city's slip inventory.
Very good. Just don't leave your car parked while you're gone for 3 months.
And I
Commissioner
think
Kramer. Oh,
also you're not allowed to have a slip without a boat in it. So you could not go down and buy a slip without having a boat assigned to it and transferred into that boat, if I'm correct.
is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I've got a question on the commercial fishing, and I think it's concerning that the Harbor Master Plan calls for to strive to maintain a minimum of 19% of the slips, and our waterfront has 7%. Are there boats that want to be there and are not, fishing boats that want to be there and are not?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, fair question. The Harbor Master Plan, adopted in 1996, came on the heels of about a lot of research and field realities in the late 80s and early 90s. And in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a bigger fishing fleet. It was during the urchin boom of the late 80s when the Japanese buyers were paying $2 a pound and urchin permits went off the charts. It was also a time where nearshore gill netting was allowed, was ultimately outlawed by Proposition 132, a voter initiative. And so the fleet, for a number of reasons, has shrunk, okay? So that number is not entirely reflected. Now, at the same time, we have a lot of visiting fishing boats year-round who have the privilege by waterfront policy of staying in the harbor all the time as long as they produce fish landing receipts showing at least 2 landings every 2 weeks. So, and they actually have a beneficial rate as well. So the number is a little bit squishy, but I can tell you the fleet, the permanent fleet has shrunk. The visiting fleet may have expanded a little bit, but the number is certainly less than the number you quoted. But at the same time, it's a vibrant fleet, as Brian described.
Are there those visiting who would like to be permanent residents there? Or
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
is there any possibility of that?
If they transfer into a slip or if they're on the waiting list, we don't have any commercial fishermen designated on the master waiting list. Those fishermen who were on the master waiting list were given priority assignments years ago, and we sort of used up that batch of fishermen who got on the list and said commercial fishing, next to their name and their preferred slip size. We've gone through all of those, so really the only way for a bona fide commercial fisherman who wants into a harbor where demand wildly exceeds supply right now is to transfer into a slip. There are other marginal mechanisms, like if a slip permittee were to give up a slip, have a slip terminated, there's a mechanism for a commercial fishing lottery, but I think that we don't need to go into that depth right now unless you want.
And I have one sort of related question. I noticed that the amount of money increased last year, but that the amount of fish decreased by about 500,000 pounds. Would you have an explanation for that?
Sure. First of all, that data is preliminary, and there was still a month to go before the end of the year. But the interesting part of your question, and I think it's quite valid, is why does the value keep going up? And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think Brian mentioned the cost of seafood is going up, and the ex-vessel value, is the value paid to the fishermen, is going up. That was particularly driven by the rising costs of fuel. Fishermen came to a point a few years ago and told the buyers, we can't go fishing because the fuel is so expensive, that the margins just aren't there to make a living. It was costing $500 a trip for an urchin boat to go to San Miguel Island and back. That was part of what was driving that. But there's also been a move towards value-added sales where people are taking the very finest grade and taking of seafood they capture, be it sea urchins or halibut, what have you. Halibut are being kept alive and sold live to specialty markets. Urchins are being sold what you might get $1 a pound for at the wholesaler. They're being sold for $5 a pound to farmers markets and niche outlets like that. So it's a combination of those things that's driven the value up compared to the landings.
Thank you very, very much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Commissioner McIntosh.
I have a quick question. We send the report to the Coastal Commission after the Planning Commission has seen it. Is that correct? Is this just a professional courtesy that we send this to the Coastal Commission? And the second half is if we are straying from our goal of being a working harbor, do we get guidance back from the California Coastal Commission?
Commissioner, Chair Spicer, Commissioner McIntosh, let me see how to take this one. First of all, I would hope that we wouldn't need to get guidance from the Coastal Commission. I think our policies and our programs that we have now and the fact that we're very on top of, as you can tell, the commercial fishing side of things and how things are working, that once we give it to them, we're kind of the experts as far as that's concerned, and they would take our word on that. I'm sure if it was something extremely bad, they would be happy to offer their comments. And your other question was, oh yes, as far as process. So if the Harbor Commission is comfortable with this particular report, again, I will then move it on to the Planning Commission, looking at a date in possibly late August. I believe it's the 21st. And then from there, we would send it to the Coastal Commission. And I believe it's part of one of our coastal permits. It might have been with the rebuilding of Stearns Wharf. I think it's mentioned in the report, but it escapes me at this point in time.
So
but it's a requirement. It's not a
requirement.
professional courtesy.
Yeah,
This is
okay.
something we need to do.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Any others? I had one quick question. Early on during the ocean-dependent changes, you'd mentioned the dry dock. Is that what was also known as the floating dock? Was that the same? Is that the same thing? Sandbar, okay, all right.
Chair Spicer, yeah, the dry dock leased a couple thousand square feet of water area off the end of F Finger in Marina One. So it's a water area lease similar to Sea Landing
Okay.
or the Sailing Center. And it's been a water lease area for many, many years. So when the dry dock went bankrupt and went away, that was the boat lifting device where they would
Right.
lift the boat out of the water and do hull work and that sort of thing. When it went away, we kept it as a lease space and approached Clean Seas about mooring one or more of their vessels there and keeping it as a lease space and bringing in another ocean-dependent use into the harbor.
Great, thank you. Thanks for clearing that up for me. Do we have an action that's required from this? Okay. Okay, gotcha.
I would move to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission to accept this report.
There's a nomination, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or nays? Passes. Thank you, Brian. Moving on to number 8, the Harbor Master Plan. Mr. Triberg?
Number 8, Harbor Master Plan Policy Review. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, receive a report on the Harbor Master Plan policies. B, recommend deletion of harbor master plan policies that are completed, no longer relevant, or infeasible. And C, recommend that the remaining harbor master plan policies be incorporated in the draft local coastal program update.
Thank you. Carl.
Chair Spicer and Commissioners, this is a follow-up from my presentation back in May about the introduction of the local coastal program update. The local coastal program update is something that our city Division of Planning is moving forward. They've received some grant funds to help fund city staff as well as Coastal Commission staff. And the primary purpose at this time is to work on the land use plan side of it, which is the policy side of the local coastal program. The implementation plan is the other half, and that's the ordinance side of it. So when we go through this over the next several months, we'll be talking about the policy aspect of it. If and when that's complete, we'll look at the ordinance part. So we got an introduction of the relationship from policy to ordinances this evening. The report Brian gave was an ordinance. We're required to do that, but it's generated. The policies are generated first. The first step in the update required by the Coastal Commission was for city staff to review local coastal program policies, including the amendments. We have policies from 1982, the original local coastal plan, and then the harbor master plan was actually an amendment to it, and we have those policies. We'll also talk about the LCP update process and schedule this evening as well. So the 1982 local coastal program had this vision for the waterfront area. As you can see, it's pretty wild. And it's a plan that the vast majority of which was not undertaken or never advanced. And it was superseded beginning in the early 1990s, realizing that this is something that really just wouldn't fly. Maybe back in the early 80s it had a chance, but by the late 80s and 1990s they realized they had perhaps dreamed a little too big of a dream. So the Harbor Master Plan, they began the process in 1992 as an appendix to the local coastal plan. They looked at existing uses, prepared a needs assessment, looking at different issues related to traffic, parking, dredging, fiscal issues, water quality, environmental, and those types of things. The needs assessment was really the cornerstone of the actual Harbor Master Plan itself. And it was organized in 4 basic planning areas: Marina 1, the Harbor Commercial Area, the Rock Groin and Boat Launch Area, and Stearns Wharf. Out of those different issues in the planning areas, they came up with all these different sections. So all of these different sections relate to the different planning areas in a variety of different ways. And you'll see these different sections come up in the local coastal plan for the most part, not all, but most of them. Cultural resources, fiscal considerations is not something that you'll find in the local coastal plan update. We're not 100% sure how we're going to address those issues, but we'll work with the Coastal Commission on that. Ocean-dependent activities, you heard a lot about that this evening from Brian's report. Public services, recreation, shoreline access, visitor serving uses, visual resources, and water and marine environment. This was the plan at the time. This was the vision by 1996 of what the waterfront should look like. 4 major planning areas, as I had mentioned. And what I'm going to do this evening is I'm just going to give a brief summary of some of the key policies and actions that were developed through the needs assessment for each of those different sections. And I'm going to break them down by planning areas and not by the different sections. It's a little easier to look at each planning area and see which policies or actions we achieved or didn't, and the reason why, than it is to go through all the different sections. Hopefully this will make a little more sense to everybody. So as an example, Marina 1, probably the biggest project that had taken place subsequent to the approval of the Harbor Master Plan, was the requirement, it was an action, an ocean-dependent action 1.2, to add 50 slips to the harbor. And those 50 slips just so happened to fit nicely into where there had previously been a mooring field, as you can see to the right there. And those are Q, R, and S fingers in Marina 1. It was done in 1998, a very large project. The Harbor Commercial Area received quite a bit of attention as part of the needs assessment in preparation of the Harbor Master Plan. Quite a few improvements were recommended. These are in the staff report and in the Harbor Master Plan, and the following slide just gives a brief summary of what was achieved. Some of the major or most significant actions that were completed: They acquired and developed the Naval Reserve Center, we refer to as the Waterfront Center now. Part of the actions were not only to acquire it, but to put a restaurant in a visitor area, which is up on the 4th floor. Retained the Breakwater Restaurant. I guess at the time there was some consideration to remove that. Increase parking and improve circulation. There is additional parking subsequent to when the Harbor Master Plan was approved, and the circulation is changed a bit, and some other issues related to that, improvements related to that. Some of the actions that were not completed for a variety of reasons, and they'll make a little more sense as I go through the presentation, is there was a proposal to relocate the Harbor Master and the Harbor Patrol offices out onto the Rock Groin, a new building for maintenance in the maintenance yard itself, in lieu of where it is now in the 117 building, and add 5 commercial slips to the Navy Pier. None of those things happened for a variety of reasons, mainly because where they were to be relocated to turned out to be infeasible, and you'll kind of see that as I go through this. Hopefully it'll make sense. The Rock Groin in the boat launch area, most folks know this area. It's the Rock Groin kind of captures the sea landing area and the launch ramp area, and it kind of makes a little jog to the west, excuse me. There was a plan to straighten that out and add all sorts of berthing, buildings, and all sorts of other different things. A lot of that proved to be infeasible. Some of the stuff we did accomplish since 1996. A couple of different things. One was a facility for non-motorized watercraft in 2012. We finished the Boating Trails project, which is the east side of the launch ramp. It's designated to non-motorized watercraft. It was a successful project, funded from a grant from the Department of Boating and Waterways. The Harbor Master Plan also directed us to look at increasing the capacity of the launch ramp. We didn't increase the footprint, but we did add 2 new lanes within the existing footprint. That was done through another grant from the Boat Launching Facilities grant through the Department of Boating and Waterways. We added public restrooms in the sea landing area and relocated the dredge power source, which is right at sort of the corner of kind of the Bath and Cabrillo Boulevard on the south side of the boulevard itself. It had been on the wharf, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Incomplete actions, kind of the main obvious one was realigning the Rock Groin, relocating the Harbor Master and Harbor Patrol offices to the realigned Rock Groin, relocating the Coast Guard cutter and Harbor Patrol vessels to the realigned Rock Groin. But one of the things that we have not completed, but we're recommending for inclusion in the update, was to add a new deli and a patio to the sea landing area. This is something that we've talked about for years, the tenants talked about for years, and just as an example of not deleting everything that's infeasible and maybe including a few things that should maybe be given consideration, we've left that in at this time. The final and fourth planning area was Stearns Wharf. Not quite as many ambitious ideas out there. We did achieve some of the things that were recommended, but not the primary one, which is that long spur to the land. We added new public restrooms. We expanded our maintenance building out there. There's quite a bit of public seating out there. We added quite a bit of that. The dredge power source used to be on Stearns Wharf. That was a big problem in and of itself, and what we refer to as the Dutra Shed. And we added a tour boat kiosk, and that's where the harbor taxi, the little toot, operates out of. The incomplete actions, the most significant one, is the extending the wharf to the beach. As with the Rock Groin realignment, extending the wharf to the beach, those would incur huge costs for us. It would really be expensive, and there's also significant environmental issues that perhaps in 1996 they felt they could overcome those, but in this day and age it would be really tough to obtain permits and deal with the environmental issues of doing those 2 projects. So we have suggested that they delete those policy actions as being infeasible. So the LCP update process, we just went through the first process, and that is just going through the existing policies, and we've submitted that to the Coastal Commission for their comments. And more or less, the policies that remain, the relevant policies, are going to build off of those for each of the different sections that will be part of the LCP. One thing that's very important to note is direction from the Coastal Commission has been that this LCP update emphasize the potential impacts from climate change and sea level rise. The city completed a vulnerability assessment a few years ago looking at projected sea level rises and what areas would be impacted, inundated. And the Coastal Commission has developed guidelines for future improvements. And that's really what the Coastal Commission is looking for. You probably noted from the 1982 and 1996 LCP and Harbor Master Plan that there was a significant visioning process, lots of workshops, public input, and somebody had to come up with those visions. The Coastal Commission is kind of not necessarily looking for that at this time. They're looking at how coastal communities are going to adapt to projected sea level rise. So those are sort of the marching orders. The next step is Coastal Commission, the city staff is going to prepare each section, several of which have already been prepared, and they're under review by the Coastal Commission staff. When that's done, they'll be revised as necessary, and then they'll be ready for public consumption. So when that is completed, we'll be soliciting public input and advisory board input, such as the Harbor Commission, for each of the different sections. I think you're going to get 2 or 3 sections at a time, probably once a month, because there's a very ambitious schedule. And one thing I want to note and make a special note of is the Coastal Commission is looking for suggestions related to adapting to sea level rise. This is still the time for the public to come out, or board members or staff, to talk about other things related to the waterfront, whatever it may be, not just sea level rise. So this is a public process where we encourage public input over and above what the Coastal Commission is looking for, and it's an important emphasis I want to make. Once the advisory boards look at these and make their recommendations, they'll go to the Planning Commission for approval, then council review and approval, and ultimately to the Coastal Commission approval. This is theoretically a 2-year process that this is going to be completed by. So it's very ambitious. Things are going to move quickly here before too long. The current schedule, July through August, several sections are completed by city staff, as I mentioned, and under review by Coastal Commission staff. It'll probably be September when we'll begin with the Harbor Commission review and recommendations of whichever sections are completed. I would assume the ad hoc committee that we're going to talk about after this item would meet prior to the September meeting to get down into the weeds, get down into the details of these different things, similar to what you see in the Harbor Master Plan, the strikeout and underline process, and then make their recommendations to the full commission. The ad hoc committee, the role I believe they're going to play that's going to be the most significant is kind of taking a broad range of ideas that might come up. There may be people that come up with a lot of different ideas as to what we should do into the future, and filter through those ideas and come up with recommendations or priorities or alternatives to recommend back to the entire Harbor Commission, which will then be moved on to the Planning Commission. So that's kind of the role and the process as I see it. I know this is a bit of a brief report. It's kind of a lot to report on at any one time, and the details are in the staff report itself. We can talk about those, any one of those specific policies that any member of the commission may have a question about, and we can try and explain why we decided to delete or include those. And that concludes my presentation at this time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for the note to solicit public input as well. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Bantolin.
So, getting a little bit into the weeds here, on Action DEP 2.4, and this kind of goes to what Commissioner Kramer was getting at in the last item, and I decided to wait for this item. So, we strive to maintain a minimum of 19% of the slips for commercial fishing. It's more like 7, with like less than 4 of them actually designated exclusively. So, I guess the question is, why would we still have that in there if it's not feasible and we're taking out things that aren't feasible? And if it is feasible and we should leave it in there, then why are we taking out giving them priority for new slips? And I know, we're talking about adding, I think, 8 new slips on E or F. And so just a little bit concerned with that specific strike through and that action there. Wondering if you have any more comment on that. And
Chair
hopefully
Spicer,
I'll give you a little bit more time to find it.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Bantolin, the logic we used with these things for the most part was how we've been doing business for the last several years. We didn't really want to render opinion on whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea. Mick did an excellent job kind of articulating why we don't have 19% of the slips designated to commercial fishing vessels at this time. We expect that a discussion related to this will occur with the ad hoc committee. Well, actually, it'll start out with the Coastal Commission staff, make its way up to the ad hoc committee and the full commission. We didn't want to just strike out everything that we weren't doing. It's a little bit difficult to tell which is relevant and which isn't relevant, which action or which policy. So that one, we struck out the part of it that was, where we would put the vessels and so on and so forth, but perhaps the idea of having 90% of commercial fishing vessels is still a good idea. We sat around and talked about it, but we didn't debate that, what percentage is the right percentage or the wrong percentage.
So then would it cause staff a lot of heartburn to keep the remainder of that sentence by giving priority for newly created slips to commercial fishermen? Is that a big issue? I mean, I think what Commissioner Kramer was getting at is they'd probably be vying for some of those new slips, and we don't have close to 19%. It's really important to us, and so I just want to get a sense of how I guess strongly staff feels about that particular sentence.
I'll let Mick chime in a moment, but when this was written, they hadn't added the 50 new slips out on QR and S-Finger. So when QR and S-Finger were developed, there was probably some consideration given to commercial fishing vessels. We have probably more demand than supply of commercial fishing slips. We have way more demand for recreational slips than we have slips available. So it's a kind of a balance between those different types of demand. And Mick, please chime in if you would, please.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bandelon, I think I see it the way you do. As long as, if we're just swagging, the scientific wild guess on the percentage, it doesn't hold that much value because times change. The black cod fishery could go off the chart and we could have 20%, all our visitor slips could be occupied by black cod fishermen, you know what I mean? There are challenges on the regulatory front where entire swaths of ocean could be put off limits for commercial fishing in order to, balance the conservation and utilization of marine resources. So I think I see it the way you do, that if we remove the 19%, that was a snapshot in time, as I mentioned, that was a function of that was informed by with the fisheries at the time. But as long as the intent of maintaining the priority for commercial fishing as a cornerstone of our working waterfront, as long as that message is in there, I personally, and I'm only one of our management staff here, I personally don't have any heartburn removing the 19% figure. Now, I wouldn't want to fill the room with my commercial fishermen constituents on that, and maybe I'm risking that, but you could just as easily say 22% or 17%, or, ultimately you have to justify, if you're going to put a number in there, you have to justify why you've put it in there. And they had a justification at the time, and I think it was derived fairly and accurately with all good intention. The times have changed a bit, the fleet shrunk a bit, value, added is a huge thing, as we saw. But I'm personally not married to the 19% figure.
Okay, and I understand Carl's point. I'm not trying to pit commercial fishermen versus recreational, and it'd be nice to have space for everybody, but that's not reality. So I understand you're willing to get rid of the 19. If we don't get rid of the 19, are you willing to keep the next sentence, or I guess the rest of the sentence there, giving priority for newly created slips? And then I guess, do my fellow commissioners have any thoughts or issues either way?
Commissioner Bandelon, well, I think the next sentence applies specifically to the slip waiting list. And the slip waiting list, for now, although we're down to 31 people on the slip waiting list from 79 when I first came to the city, slowly we, assigned slips off it, doesn't have any designated commercial fishermen on that waiting list. So for the foreseeable future, I think that strike through is appropriate. And then the part that says persons currently leasing or mooring off Marina One, well, that's appropriately struck through because those don't exist anymore. So, unless I'm off target here, Carl.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Bandelon, this makes a very important point. The reason why we want to have an ad hoc committee is to get down into the weeds just exactly like this. This may not necessarily be the time and the place to debate that. We sort of did our best at a first cut of what policies should be advanced and which shouldn't. So I think the point is that we did our best, and there's a lot of these kind of issues and examples that you could spend quite a bit of time on, and I think that's what the Coastal Commission expects us to do, and I think that's the role of the ad hoc committee. It's difficult to do this with a full commission on a Thursday night. It's a lot easier to have a smaller group with the management in the conference room going through those things and coming up with the relevant data. Mick brought up a lot of good points that probably better discussed at a smaller setting. So not just this one, and you guys were welcome to talk about all of them if you'd like to this evening, but I just want to make a point about why we think an ad hoc committee is an important component of this process.
And I appreciate that, and I think you're right, and I'll leave it to the ad hoc committee, and I wasn't planning on throwing my name in the ring, but maybe I will now. Thanks.
So as a point of procedure, so the ad hoc committee would go through this document along with others and make recommendations specifically to this document, or?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, not exactly. We are recommending that these policies be advanced to the Coastal Commission as kind of the baseline policies that should be carried forward. We didn't get into a lot of detailed analysis, 19% versus 15% versus 10. All of this comes back again in each respective section. It'll be an ocean-dependent section, and I'd have to look at the schedule to tell you when we expect that to come back. But that's the time when we would revisit not only the ones that we didn't delete. There may be ones we deleted the Coastal Commission doesn't want to see deleted, that they may come back against our advice. And then there are going to be new ones. So the process is really, this is just the first stepping stone of the entire process, and someone kind of had to go through and go, okay, this one is relevant and this one isn't, just as a starting point. But all of these are back up for discussion section by section, probably starting in September.
This is seen as a first draft that goes to the Coastal Commission.
Yes.
They kind of look at it and
Yeah.
say they like it, they don't, then they come back, and then we spend more time with each section.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had a follow-up to Commissioner Sloan's, because we are asked to make a recommendation, but we can then afterwards, the committee can go into the weeds, and it'll come back again for detail.
That's exactly right.
Okay, very good. Other questions at this time, then? Okay, then we have a number of things. We have B and C to vote on, and then after that, I believe we would appoint the committee.
I'll make a recommendation to accept the deletions and recommend that the remaining policies stay incorporated.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll put this to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Okay. Jeanette, help me here. Was that B we just voted on, or is that both B and C?
I think we voted.
That was both B and C. I
Okay.
have the motion in a second
Great.
for the same.
Thank you. Okay, then now we will take this creation of the committee. I would ask at this point if anybody is interested. Are there any volunteers at this point?
I would like to volunteer.
Commissioner Sloan has volunteered. Any others? Commissioner Webb?
I'm interested.
Commissioner McIntosh? Okay, Commissioner Kramer, that does make 4. So, unless myself or Commissioner Power or Mr. Bantlin, then I believe we put that to a vote.
Do committees have to be 3 only, or can they be 4? 3 only? Is that right?
Commissioner Sloan, that's correct. We can't have a majority meeting, and it would be a Brown Act violation.
Right, correct.
Can you walk me through the procedure? Do we vote one at a time? Do we go through each name?
Chair Spicer, I believe we should probably just go through each name in the order in which they volunteered, and everybody can
We'll see how the chips fall.
do, yeah.
Okay. All in favor of Commissioner Sloan being on this committee, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Did you get those?
Why don't we?
Please hold your hands up. Otherwise, we'll need to go to do a roll call. Okay. All in favor of Commissioner Webb, please hold your hands up. Okay.
Point of order, like, I'm just curious because council does it a different way where if there's more than the council votes on, I don't know, either way, I don't want to have to vote against a fellow commissioner.
Right.
But
I
then
see.
it just kind of seems odd where like I think Commissioner McIntosh was waiting for others to speak up and so. I don't know if
What
he
is
lost to someone
process?
else. Well, like, so if there were, say if there's more harbor commissioner applicants, there were 3 and 2 of us made it and so we just voted for 2, so each of us vote for 3. And that's still, we still have to vote for 3 instead of 4. It's kind of an awkward process either way, but I just want to be sure.
So clarify that?
Yeah, I didn't,
So we can only choose 3, and there's 4 applicants.
you only have 3 votes, each person, okay.
Each person would just list 3 people, and then you see who has majority votes. I'm not trying to.
Okay, Commissioner
I just
Webb.
want to make sure we get it right.
Because of the how massive this material is, would it be able to create 2 ad hoc groups? 2 separate committees dealing with different issues?
I don't see that as advantageous. I understand the volume of information. Mr. Reedman?
Chair Spicer, I believe that would also be flirting with Brown Act issues if we had 2 committees with the majority of the 7 commissioners discussing some of the same issues.
Okay. I would like to use Mr. Bantelin's suggestion that each commissioner has 3 votes in total to use, and then we'll go through the list. And then that way, not every candidate can get 7 votes. So if we're okay, we will start at the beginning, and we'll go through each name, and each commissioner only has 3 votes to use throughout the entire process. Will that make a difference? Is that your suggestion, Corey? Okay. And that's how City Council does it. Okay. We will start again. Oh. Certainly. Okay. Okay.
Is that how city council does it?
Well, they never vote for themselves, so I don't know about that part. That's they're
Where's Frank when you need him?
well.
Okay.
Well, I guess they do appoint themselves on different boards and commissions. Usually, there's not really a battle, so I don't know. I defer to staff. I know we don't have city attorney here or anybody else, but maybe.
I can make this happen, or Mr. Reedman, do you have any experience with this?
Chair Spicer, I'm getting a little bit out of my realm here. In terms of the protocols, we've never had to do a vote type situation for a committee.
Okay.
We could probably have the 4th person as an alternate in case somebody can't make a meeting. I could check with the attorney's office on that. That might be an idea. Otherwise, I like Commissioner Bantelin's idea, and also probably not voting for yourself.
Very good. I like that as well. So
You can't vote for yourself?
you cannot vote for yourself. And we will go for 3 spots, and and then we'll look at the alternate as an option as well. And Jeanette, per your suggestion, we can start with Commissioner Webb. So, all those who would like to use a vote for Commissioner Webb to join this committee, please put your hand up. Got 'em? Okay. All those who would like to vote for Commissioner Sloan for this committee, please raise your hand. Okay. All those who would like Commissioner Kramer on this committee, please raise your hand. Okay. All those for Commissioner McIntosh, please raise your hand. Okay. I have a unaudited, what appears to be an unaudited returns on our election. Do you have the official? Oh, I thought you wanted to go in order of where they were sitting.
Well, we did everything.
Yeah, we did everybody, but I believe we have the answers. I believe it's Commissioner Sloan, Commissioner Webb, Commissioner McIntosh, with Commissioner Kramer as the alternate. Okay.
That work?
Okay.
Can I make a motion to that effect?
I'd love it. A second?
So moved.
Was there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. A vote to bless this committee. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions? Noes? Thank you.
I have one point I'd like to make, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Very good, sir.
It seems to me that the concern with 3 is for voting. That wouldn't preclude any commissioner, I would assume, from sitting in on the meeting and adding to the discussion. It's not a closed meeting, is it?
It could be a Brown Act.
I think you can sit in on the meeting, but you can't add to the discussion.
That's correct.
So you just listen?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It
I know
can't be
you, I
a-
know you wouldn't be able to vote, but
You
I'm,
can't participate.
okay, so it's not, so you wouldn't be taking public comment either? Because it's not a Brown Act committee, I would assume.
You can take public comment, but
You can take public comment.
you can't take commissioner comment.
Interesting.
That's the way at least other commissions
Yeah,
have,
thank you.
other committees have worked.
Okay, moving on to our next topic. Jeanette, will you please read the recommendation?
Yes, item 9, proposed lease agreement with Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, Inc. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, Inc. for the berthing of commercial fishing boats on the north side of Cabrillo Landing in the Santa Barbara Harbor.
And Mr. Bossy, back to you.
Good evening, Commissioner Spicer, or Chair Spicer, I should say. Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, Inc. is a 501c6 organization and has maintained a license agreement for the 143 feet of side tie dock space on the north side of Cabrillo Landing since 1987. Their current agreement expires in exactly 2 weeks. Now, the basic terms of the new proposed license agreement are for 5 years, similar to the expiring license agreement, at a base rent of $1,441.97. That is also subject to increase as our slip fees increase. So if slip fees go up 2%, then this would go up 2%. It would also allow up to 20 vessels, including to access and use that particular dock space. And they would all have to provide their names as well as their registration numbers in order for them to use that particular site. All vessels would need to be operable, which is in tune with Mr. Cromden's recent changes to the municipal code. And we've also updated and brought their their insurance requirements up to what the current city standards are. So the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara Incorporated, they're in they're a tenant in good standing. They make their payments in a timely manner. And again, they're an extremely important part of our harbor. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about this license agreement.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Sloan.
Thank you for the report. I did have one question. Is there a requirement that they maintain commercial fishing licenses, the vessels that are docked there?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, yes, but not earnings requirements.
Okay, but they do have to be commercial fishermen.
Yeah, and they are
licensed.
all commercial fishermen. They're urchin divers.
Yeah, it just didn't say that in there. so-
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, as long as that's a requirement.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a recommendation. Is there a nomination?
I'll make a motion to
A motion.
approve the renewal of the license agreement.
We have a motion. Is there a second? A second, okay. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstention or nays? Unanimously passes. Thank you. Next, we are number 10. Jeanette, would you read that, please?
Item 10, proposed lease amendment 1 of lease agreement number 23564 with Conway Vineyards, Inc. Recommendation that Harbor Commission recommend approval to City Council of amendment number 1 of lease agreement number 23564 Conway Vineyards, Inc., allowing for a seasonal allocation of base rent for the 1,332 square foot lease space at 217G Stearns Wharf.
Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. Conway Vineyards has leased 1,332 square feet on Stearns Wharf since October of 2010, and they got that lease through a competitive RFP process. As I stated in one of my previous presentations, they've done a wonderful job expanding the use of the site, as well as, again, making it very hospitable, a nice place to go have a glass of wine and check out their products. Their current base rent is a little over $4,300 per month, and that's every month, 12 months a year, or 10% of their gross sales, whichever is greater. In May of this year, Chris Conway, the owner of Conway Vineyards, approached Waterfront Department staff and was curious to know what a what a seasonally allocated rent would be, which is similar to a lot of our other tenants, including Brophy's, Santa Barbara Shellfish, Shoreline Beach Cafe. A number of those folks have seasonal rent allocations. And what that is in the thinner months of the year when business isn't as quite as snappy, generally January, February, March, and April, as well as November and December, when sales are generally lower for everybody across the board, their rent is at a lower rate, their rent rate. And so in those bigger months, your summer months, May through October, your rent is increased. So the sum total, the end dollar amount is the same. And we proposed what that would look like to Mr. Conway. He liked what that looked like, and he asked that we put together an amendment package for us to take to the Harbor Commission. So there's a schedule in here of what that would look like. It would equal the same amount as it currently does. And again, it's similar to many of the other leases we do in the harbor as well as the waterfront. The Conway Vineyards is a tenant in good standing. They've been prompt with all their rent payments, and to be honest, they're a pleasure to work with. Their sales from 2012 to 2013 went up 21%, and so far the data we have back from this current calendar year, they're up 20%. So they continue, which is a significant amount of increase over the 2 to 3 years that they've been there. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this particular lease amendment.
Any questions? Mr. Bantlin.
I'll move the item, but I also note that they had a pretty summer winter, and it looks like Mr. Conway is predicting rain, which would be, I think, okay with us. Maybe not great for other waterfront businesses, but I think everybody would enjoy a little bit of water this winter. But with that, I'll make a motion to approve it.
But before we do that, I had a couple quick questions. I'm curious why it took him 4 years to come and ask for a change like this. And then my second question, it sounds like business is brisk. Does he exceed the base rent usually or just in the summer months?
Chair Spicer, those are both great questions. As far as the latter question, do they exceed the 10%, or do they get into the percentage rent? In calendar year 2012, they got into it 3 different times, and it was August, September, and October, so essentially summer months, high-end months. Last year, they got into the percentage rent category 8 times, but that goes anywhere from $37 into the percentage rent category up to $1,400. So most of those, again, were in those summer months. So I anticipate that based on their sales in previous years that they would continue to get into that percentage rent the same amount of time, regardless of whether it's the current $4,300 per month or this amended lease increasing up to I believe it's $5,000. I think they would still get into that category. And why it took them 4 years, I'm not quite sure they knew it was available to them. And I think what they're really focused on is getting the business up and running, and having the same dollar amount every month was probably just something they could take off their plate. They knew they had to pay. But now as they become a little bit more understanding of the cycles of business out on the Stearns Wharf, I think now's a good time for them to pursue this.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I concur with you that they've done a great job. So we have a motion, so is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Abstentions or nays? There are none. This passes. Staff communications. Anything, Mr. Reedman?
Nothing from staff tonight, thank you.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. First and a second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you. We're adjourned.